Burgess here with Music Marketing TV. We are doing another episode of Unnatural Limiting. This time we're looking at the Pro-L 2 and using it for transient shaping. These are some pretty extreme moves. The entire idea is to deliberately mess with the transients of our signal. I have a lead bus here that has that pluck sound on it. So this is the MIDI for this particular track. And these two leads, they're both plucks. They're coming through here. And there is an L2 on here that is being mixed in and out over time. And there is the clean version. And I deliberately made the gain just a touch louder, just so it also functions as sort of a way of nudging it forward in the mix. You could always just turn it down a little bit if you want it to be perfectly matched. But I kind of liked what it did there. So we have this initial very plucky version. And then if we go ahead and mix this in, a very, very squashed version. And you get things like all the reverb and stuff gets pulled up through there, which by the way is being provided by the Pro R2, the reverb from FabFilter. So let's talk a little bit about these settings. I'm setting the gain like incredibly high. And this is a limiter, and it's going to turn down the signal when it gets too loud, and it's going to try and leave everything else as high as possible, a maximizer, so to speak. And so there are two stages that this happens in. There's a transient stage, and this transient stage can be very, very, very fast. So fast that it acts as a clipper. So we're talking super dang quick. In fact, I have here two versions of it where the only difference is the Lookahead, and I've deliberately set it up to act like a clipper. So here's the first one, and here's the second one. If you were to take a look at the waves directly, we see that this wave is very sort of normal looking, and there's a lot of little variations in the wave. So the wave, even though it's kind of a stretch to call something this short dynamics, the wave retains some of its original shape, the original dynamics. Over here, we see a totally different story. The gain is turning up and down so quickly because the limiter is grabbing it and then letting go and then grabbing it and then letting it go. And so this is going to be louder, but it also is going to have a bunch of distortion. And there's all these trade-offs you make when you do it. It becomes a little more clear when we take a look at it on the spectral view. There's quite a bit more brightness in the high end, and these ones are not nearly as bright. So let's take a look here at how to set this up as a clipper, because it's a useful first step. So if we take away the Lookahead, essentially, when something happens, it has to act on it in that moment. So it is going to be dragging around waveforms as soon as the waveform happens. And this is essentially how a wave shaper works. And so if we do not have a Lookahead, this initial stage, this transient stage of the Pro-L 2 will have control. I am deliberately leaving the attack knob out for the moment. Just understand the attack knob must be somewhat high for this to work. The transients that come in can get sorted into it being processed by this initial transient stage or the more release stage of what's going on. And that's what this attack controls. So if we leave this high, it's going to get processed entirely by that, and it's going to be processed at the moment it happens, and that's going to change the waveform. And that's why the waveform looks so much denser in the one with the low Lookahead, and it's going to sound super distorted. Here's what it sounds like. And the different styles will sound different because they each have their own algorithm. There's a lot of stuff going on under the hood. And so, for example, here's punchy. Here is dynamic. And then we'll go back to transparent. I mean, you can try them out yourself. So if we engage a Lookahead, this allows the gain to react before the waveform has happened. And so there will be less distortion with the gain changes because it's not going to happen right away. It gets a chance to look ahead and adjust itself. And this can dramatically reduce that super brick wall that we had before. Now it's only a little of a bit of a brick wall. It's still pretty dang hard lined. If you look at the waveforms, like it's pretty obviously clipped there. Like it's been turned up way a ton, but it's got more variation than this, which is just straight up a wall. So and when we say like this is going to be louder or maximized, but it's going to have more distortion, it's kind of one of the things we're talking about. So when we play this, much cleaner than this. You don't need much. You only need like 2 milliseconds, 1 millisecond, if that, just enough to be longer than a waveform being yanked up and down is, because you want the entire cycle to happen without distortion. The gain moves need to be bigger than the frequencies in the waveform, or you're going to get a bunch of distortion. Now, I don't have it on yet, but I would usually run this with oversampling at ×8. Versus if we bring this up to like 2. So we're really crushing that transient. Now let's talk about this attack control here real quick. So the attack control controls what is processed by the transient layer, this initial stage, and what is processed by this more sustained stage that works off the average of the signal. So if we have this really low, and right now I have the release really high. So the release is gonna try and let go immediately, but this attack is gonna make it so that this release has full control over what's happening. The transient stage will not have any power because everything is gonna be after 0 milliseconds. So let's get rid of the lookahead, and the attack will take care of all this for us. And so we don't have that distortion there because it's trying to obey the release on this. And if we go ahead and move the release up, give it a longer time, we'll see that it could start to bleed over and you can get some smoother results. If we really turn it up, it'll be turning down stuff that shouldn't really be turned down if you're going for the loudest possible thing. You can see this bleed now as the attack and how long this attack takes to get up. So if you want something that's going to be really loud with not too much distortion, you're going to want a really fast release. You're going to want an attack time that gives the transient engine enough time to do its thing, because this is going to provide the most loudness. But if you get some distortion, you might try Lookahead or bringing back the attack a little bit. In theory, a really long attack and no Lookahead would produce the loudest possible thing, with the drawback being you get a lot of distortion and then you go and you try to balance it all. So in the context of what we're doing here, and it's really important that you gain match this when you're doing it, because we're going to deliberately push it really hard, and we just want to yank up the reverb and affect the transients in cool ways. So I don't want this distortion too much, so I'm going to set it at like 1.8 milliseconds, whatever, somewhere around there. That's fine. And these knobs are a little bit deceptive almost, because this is 600 milliseconds. So that means from 0.6 of a second to 10 seconds is this entire half of the knob. And then that means that these little moves, like look at this. This is like a full millisecond, 0, and the first tick is at 1. So we have, these moves are a lot more fine than they look. And that's a good thing. It makes the knob really intuitive and a lot more useful to work with. So due to these bigger values, it just doesn't matter as much. So if we go ahead and we set it to something like, I don't know, I really don't want this, the attack, I don't want the sustain phase to really matter that much at all. You do want the release down, depending on how you set this up. The release can have a lingering effect between transients. So I always just like to leave it down. So we get these really fast grabs. And then when we take the mix out, we have like a really transient low reverb. And then a really squashed, essentially transient shaped thing. This could work great on drums as well. But it is a fun little thing to do. I do, when I am working on this, I like to take the transients off and have the 2 channels processed entirely separately. And so now we have this really nice effect. We can sort of mix it in as it goes. You know, you can automate it however you like and stick it in the track. Of course, you're going to want to listen to it with everything on. So on. I sort of did the opposite of what I'd probably want there. I'd want the high note probably emphasized. But it's a cool way to change the timbre as you're going and just create an interesting effect. One that, as long as you gain match it, can be a really neat way to use the Pro-L 2. And also, you'll get a much, much better vibe for the different styles, because sometimes these can suddenly sound really different, especially if you're leaning into the distortion and you have a really low look ahead time. Let me know down below if you have used it in this way before, or if you have another way you would use it in terms of messing with the transients. Subscribe and hit that bell icon for future videos, and have a blessed day.